In this reflection, I would like to return to Dennis Ford's book and look at the chapter on naturalism. Let's see what Ford has to say about naturalism. I'm especially interested in what he has to say about religious naturalism. Ford tells us that the existentialist finds living in an indifferent world without appeal and absurd and angst-filled, whereas the naturalist finds it sufficiently joyful and intrinsically meaningful. How can this be? For the naturalist, life does not acquire meaning because it corresponds to an external myth or philosophical idea, nor does it acquire meaning because it leads to or embodies a pragmatic purpose or a teleological end, whether in this world or the next. And on the contrary, the meaning of life is simply life itself to a naturalist. Naturalism rests on three basic assumptions. These include materialism, reductionism, and causality. With respect to materialism, recall that naturalism derives that there are no supernatural or spiritual realities, so literally no metaphysics allowed in naturalism. With respect to reductionism, this involves, of course, the process of reducing complex phenomena to relatively simpler parts. This goes on all the time in naturalism. We do this in science, of course, reducing our emotions to the processes of organic or biochemistry. With respect to causality, this addresses the point that all phenomena, according to a naturalist, are caused by a sequence of exclusively material events without any supernatural or metaphysical or divine intervention. There is no God or supernatural agency or teleological purpose that serves as a cause. The history of science can be understood to be a record of naturalizing, or some say secularizing, phenomena. For example, the naturalist has replaced the idea of soul with the idea of DNA. A naturalist acknowledges spiritual experiences, but understands these to be legitimate and real in this world. The reality is not dependent on or substantiated by a transcendent or metaphysical world. So, if the naturalist is not nostalgic for a transcendental God, he or she is nonetheless nostalgic for the emotions and comforts associated with God. Or in other words, the naturalist abandons the idea of God, but not the experiences, emotions, and thoughts formerly elicited by a belief in God. So spirituality, if not salvation, is available without any metaphysics entirely in this world. And so a naturalist does not seek to transcend the contingent and fleeting world in favor of another more permanent or universal world, nor does he or she use the world as a portal or instrument for metaphysical disclosure. The world has no metaphysical depth to a naturalist, nor does it point to anything transcendent. This world is all we have, but this world is sufficient. There is a sense in which play becomes important to a naturalist. This involves activities done spontaneously and for their own sake. Play may ironically be our most important and useful occupation because it makes life something more than just an endless response to obligations and servile labor. For only in these useless occupations can we catch a glimpse of the things that make life really worth living. Work is the means of life and leisure the end. Without the intrinsic end, work is meaningless, a means to a means to a means, endlessly. And at the end of all intrinsic or instrumental means or acts, the final act must intrinsically be valuable. Joseph Pfeiffer summarizes the importance of leisure or play in this way. The real wealth of man lies not in the satisfaction of his necessities, nor again in becoming lords or masters of nature, but rather in being able to understand what is and the whole of what is. If there is a transcendent experience in naturalism, it is the attempt to transcend the blinding influence of custom and inattention and pragmatic usefulness that impedes our perception of the joy and wonder of what is. The theme of awakening to nature by transcending the blindness of custom and inattention offers a form of salvation that affronts neither our reason nor our humanity. The point is that we are alienated from nature and find the world meaningless as a consequence because of a failure of perception. We fall from the innocent grace of childhood whenever we substitute the habitual modes of perception for the ecstasy of sensuous existence. The new world that we're looking for is not another transcendent world, but this world transformed and seen in a new light. The destruction and passing of this old world expresses an internal movement in us from the familiar to the wondrous. Ford tells us of how Robert Solomon, another philosopher, recounted how his fascination with bugs and other sorts of critters provided a means for escaping his insecurities and painful sense of self-consciousness. Solomon writes that his fascination with nature actually transported him to a larger universe. In such apocalyptic moments, that is, where the old world dies and a new one is revealed as a result of close attention, we overcome ourselves in our alienation from this world by becoming lost in the attentive act itself. Spirituality, then, is living each day as though it were the first and last day of our lives. We ought to dance with rapture, D.H. Lawrence said, that we should be alive and in the flesh and part of the living incarnate cosmos. Most of us have had moments of natural mysticism when we were transported by the spectacle of an alpine glow on a high mountain, or the haunting sound of flocks of migrating geese. If we hang on to these moments, no matter how fleeting, we can reject metaphysics without rejecting or dismissing experiences traditionally associated with religious devotion. Such experiences are not illusory or completely subjective. We know that they are genuine spiritual experiences, grounded not in the supernatural, but in the attentive perception and knowledge of what is. Ford writes that for naturalists, the term spirituality is actually an honorific term signifying intrinsically valuable experiences, however fleeting, which evoke feelings such as care or humility or joy. Like existentialism and Buddhism, naturalism reminds us that the meaning of life is life, and nothing more, nothing less. Ford references Henry David Thoreau, who expressed both the fear of life lost and the hope of a life redeemed, in explaining that he moved to Walden Pond because he wished to live life deliberately and to front only the essential facts of life and see if he could learn what it had to teach, and not, when he came to die, discover that he had not lived.